This is my great honor today to interview one of my Olympic heroes and a friend, John Naber. Let me share some of John's accomplishments as an Olympian and an NC2A college champion. John, in 1976 at the Montreal Games, John was America's most decorated athlete, man or woman, in Montreal, where he won 4 gold medals and 1 silver medal. And along the way, he would break 6 world records. He can explain the math later. John gold medaled in the 100 and 200 backstroke, the 400-meter medley relay, the 800-meter freestyle relay, and he also won a silver in the 200-meter freestyle event. His backstroke record, I believe it was the 100, lasted for 7 years. John won, in addition to the Olympic success that he had, he won 10 NC2A swimming titles, and he led USC to 4 consecutive back-to-back national titles. John's written several books as well. He's an author, including Awaken the Champion Within, Stories of America's Greatest Olympic Heroes, The Power of Character, Prominent Americans Talk About Values and More, and then one that I've got, Olympic Trivia. And then lastly, Eureka, How Innovation Changed the Olympic Games and Everything Else. John, in addition to being an author, he's been a television commentator for 10 Olympic Games, including Paralympic Games. John has worked at every network, ABC, NBC, ESPN, HBO, CBS, and Fox, covering 30 different sports, as well as being a commentator, a host of the Tournament of Roses parade in Pasadena, California for many years. And lastly, I want to say John has given his time tirelessly to many organizations, including the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic committees, the Olympic Relief Fund, the Los Angeles Sports Council Board of Directors, to name just a few. Please note there will be links in this YouTube interview to John's web page, which is johnnaber.com, and then some of his current passion projects, because John is very much active today with the Olympics and beyond with his time. And he's told me already he will be at Paris this summer for the 2024 games. So I like what you hear today as I ask John questions and he talks about his journey as well as the Olympics, beyond swimming, and where we've come the last 50 years with Olympic events. So, John, without any further ado, I did want to just jump in and ask you to talk about Montreal and maybe go backwards first. What were the steps that got you to Montreal? When did you first start swimming, and when did the light go on? I think I'm pretty good at this. When did you really take it up to the next level? Take us back to.
I have to go way back. I'm the second of 4 children. Dad raised us for 7 years in Europe. And when I was 10, we visited Olympia, Greece, where I was introduced to the Olympic movement. And I found that it was less about athletic excellence and more about honoring character, sportsmanship, and honoring the gods with your body. And I told my mom at that point, I'd like to be an Olympian someday. And she said, really, what sport? And I said, I don't know. I didn't start swimming for another 3 years, but I believed in the Olympic movement. When I finally returned to California as a freshman in high school, I started swimming, and it was painful, but I was progressing so much every day that I knew that I could excel, or at least I could enjoy the improvement. And the Olympic motto, Citius Altius Fortius, swifter, higher, stronger, not swiftest, highest, strongest. It's about improvement, not victory so much. So I figured, okay, I think I can get better every year. And in fact, by my junior year, I was approaching Olympic standard times until I bounced off a diving board and broke my collarbone and put a dimple in my cheek. And I was out for the season, the junior year of high school, but I came back in time to qualify for the 1972 trials, which took place in Oak Park, Illinois. And that's where Mark Spitz earned his 7 places on the US Olympic team, and he would go on to win 7 gold medals. I finished 5th, and they took 3. I was 0.6 of a second off of the Munich Olympic team. And at that point, I said, hey, if I stay healthy for 4 more years, I can go to the Olympics. It wasn't until that point that I was confident that I could make the Olympic team. And from there, I started breaking American records, helped USC win a bunch of team titles along with many other Olympians. And when you train in an environment where there's a lot of Olympians all training together, there is such a focus on improvement, and you're always racing against somebody in the next lane, and nobody allows you to slack off. And if you miss a workout, somebody says, "Hey, where were you this morning?" And with that attitude, that rising tide lifted all boats, and that sort of propelled us into the Olympic arena. And in 1976 in Montreal, I was one of 5 or 6 USC Trojans to make the Olympic team.
It's amazing.
Every one of us won a medal of some color. And it was one of those remarkable moments where, a whole lot of focus. It's sort of like a magnifying glass focusing the rays of the sun. That pool got really hot. And we delivered very well in Montreal. Now, many of your viewers were not alive in 1976, and they will not remember those games, but I remember those games as featuring Nadia Comaneci, the Romanian gymnast who scored the first perfect 10, Sugar Ray Leonard, who became a very successful professional boxer. He won his gold there. Edwin Moses began a winning streak of 110 high hurdles races. And the decathlon, the world's greatest athlete title, was won by Bruce Jenner, who now is more famous as being Caitlyn Jenner, the influencer. So a lot of things took place in Montreal, and I should also note that it was the last of what we refer to as the pre-boycott games, because 4 years later, we did not go to Russia. America boycotted the Moscow Olympics. And 4 years after that, Russia did not come to Los Angeles as they boycotted our games. So Montreal was the last time of the, us versus them battles that we would keep track of. And then by 1988, 1992, the walls had come down and it wasn't as big a deal. But at the time, it was a real big feature of the Cold War that we were trying to prove, or rather the Russians and Soviets were trying to prove their athletic supremacy of communism. And the Americans were using boys and girls for mom and dad's help to get to the Olympics. And that was what made it fun and interesting.
Yeah, we go back to high school then. You're finding that you've got some talent and skill. You're applying yourself, and your times are dropping. You're realizing you're moving up into kind of rare air, closer to to the top within U.S. swimming, age group swimming, and then beyond Olympic time trials marks. When did you get on USC screen in terms of how did you get recruited to USC? How were they before you got there? You won 4 titles back to back, but talk about Peter. That coach was an important person in your life. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, I have to turn the clock back a little bit. My freshman year in high school, the kid sitting next to me in algebra class, Jeff Stites, had come home with a silver medal from the Junior Olympics, and his name was in the paper as America's second fastest 13, 14-year-old boy in the backstroke. To me, he was a celebrity. And it was my relationship with Jeff that brought me onto the swim team. I wasn't very good, but I got the most improved award 3 years in a row. I mean, my progress was significant. And then by my junior year, as I indicated, that's the year that most colleges begin recruiting high school swimmers. But that was the year I was out for the season with a broken collarbone. So I think I was under the radar for most of the nation's coaches. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was breaking the American record. Suddenly, everybody was interested, but by then, I had narrowed my focus to the 3 schools in California that had the most successful swimming programs. Stanford, UCLA, and USC were the candidates. And Peter Daland, the head coach at USC, had been the head Olympic coach in Munich, Germany. He was Mark Spitz's Olympic coach. And that carried a lot of weight. And then many other swimmers in my high school graduating class from other parts of the country had declared their interest to go to USC. So I was happy to join them, and we had a very powerful incoming class, and we started winning right away. Now, USC had finished first, second, or third in the NC2As in each of the prior 20 years. Peter Daland was a very, very good coach. And the year before we got there, he'd finished second. Swim World magazine picked us to be runners-up again my freshman year. And after we won that year, they picked us to be second again to Indiana my sophomore year. Indiana with Mark Spitz and Gary Hall and John Kinsella, they had won 6 consecutive NC2A titles under the leadership of Doc Councilman, Dr. James E. Councilman, probably the most famous coach in the country at the time. But because Indiana is so far away, I didn't even consider them seriously as a possible choice. So anyway, I went to USC, realizing at the time that I was going to be there for 4 years. I had made a 4-year commitment to the school, and the school made a 4-year scholarship commitment to me. And so that was my focus. And at the time, swimming was completely amateur. So there was not even a thought of continuing to a second Olympic team. My Olympic Games occurred the summer between my junior and senior years in college. And then I swam one more season for USC, and then I knew I was done. I hung up the old Speedo trunks. And at that point, I got a phone call saying, John, would you be a color commentator in your sport? Kids asked me, what do you have to do to become a color commentator in swimming? I said, it's easy. Just win 5 Olympic medals.
Yeah. It's funny. Mark Spitz never really turned that corner with doing commentating that I remember, but you did.
Well, Mark did it. There just wasn't much swimming on ABC between Munich and Montreal. He did it. He wore the canary yellow jacket, but that wasn't his focus. He was busy making money behind the scenes.
Right.
And the opportunity came, and I took it.
So you brought up a good point, in terms of life for the amateur swimmer back in the 70s, and then specifically leading into something like an Olympic Games like Montreal. Today, I see a lot of young people, a lot of swimmers that just drop out of their university for a year or two before the games. They're already good enough to be an Olympic competitor, and they just simply stop going to their university, no matter what it is, to focus on their training. But nobody did that back in the 70s. You stayed at USC and you competed and trained there up until the spring of 76, and then you go to the trials and you just simply train with the Olympic athletes that make it in the trials. You meet your fellow Olympians to train before Montreal. Is that the way it worked?
Yeah, the Olympic trials were in June of 76. Our NC2As were in March of 76. So we had 3 months to train at USC. Then we go to the trials. Once you make the team, you get sent to the Olympic training camp. And here, a whole bunch of Trojans and a whole bunch of Indiana Hoosiers came together. This was rivalry, but now we're on the same team. We're sharing relay memberships. And there was the potential of bitterness or angst or rivalry. Can you pass the sugar? Oh, here you go. But Doc Councilman came in and he spoke to us that very first night. And he said, gentlemen, congratulations on making the Olympic team. I'm sure each of you have goals for your performance in Montreal 4 weeks from now. Let me share with you my goal for this team. And then he said, you know what? There are 13 men's swimming events in Montreal. I think the men in this room can win every race.
Wow.
This got the backstrokers looking at the breaststrokers and say, I need to follow their performance. Then he went on to say, I think the men in this room can win more medals in swimming than the rest of the world combined. And I think the men in this room can win more Olympic medals than the rest of the U.S. Olympic team, other sports combined. And all of a sudden, it became really important for the athletes to do exceptionally well together. So we never left anybody out of workout. We were encouraging. The atmosphere was mutually supportive, and they produced some great results. In fact, in 13 races in Montreal, the American men were unable to win 1 of the gold, 1 of the silver, and 6 of the bronze. We swept every other potential medal. It was so dominant that at the next Olympic Congress, the International Swimming Governing Body changed the rules to limit each country to 2 entries, not 3. And as a result, the most medals America can win in any individual event is 2 now. And the bronze medalist in the Olympics might not necessarily be the 3rd fastest in the world, because that kid could have been left home at the trials.
Yeah. And even to this day, you have such a competitive swim scene in America. You could be number 3 at the trials in America and qualify at 24 other countries if you just, were someplace else where there weren't as many top competitors in your event. But
there are many dual citizenship athletes training in the U.S. who are given a choice. You want to race for the U.S. or you want to race for your other nationality? And my hat's off to those who say, I'm willing to risk it all to swim for the U.S. I'd rather be on the U.S. Olympic team and struggle to get there than be given an automatic spot, for Netherlands or Denmark or whoever, So that's one of the things that's really wonderful about the Olympic trials. It's the most competitive swim meet in the world. because you have to almost give it your very best just to make it into the finals,
Right.
and then you got to do it again. Whereas at the Olympics, there's not that many really good swimmers. To make it into the finals is a lot easier at the Olympics than it is at the trials.
How ironic. So you almost have to taper and shave for the trials. Like that is the big event where you can't leave anything back. You have to put it all out there or you won't make it. You won't make those top two spots. So you touch on a good point. I just want to transition into talking about being a part of a team, being an Olympian who's part of a team, and that community, that camaraderie where you're a part of something. And most Olympic athletes don't medal. Just statistically, there just aren't, that many medals, right? And yet, so for so many people, they say it's the highlight of their life. And I've heard a lot of people that, also won medals that also did other things that were significant. The goalie of the 1960 U.S. men's hockey team that beat the Russians in 1960, he was a Harvard graduate, and he went on to, I believe he was a justice of the court. So he did other things with his life, and yet he said that was the greatest moment of his life, representing his country at the game. So what's that camaraderie like where you're with the very best? If you made it there, you're part of the best, whether you get a medal or not. And who were one or two personalities that you got to know that you didn't know? Maybe it was a competitor from IU or something. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, well, let me begin by saying that I know a lot of Olympians from a lot of different sports, and many of them are medalists, but almost all of them feel that the marching into the stadium for opening ceremonies was the highlight of their life. Even those that won medals say to be a part of that movement, to come out of the tunnel, to hear the applause, to see our flag, that is a very moving moment. And I was president of the U.S. Olympic alumni for 8 years. And during that period, we came up with the motto, once an Olympian, always an Olympian. You're never a former Olympian. You're never a past Olympian. The motto now is once an Olympian or Paralympian, always an Olympian or Paralympian, because the Paralympics didn't really begin in the US until much later. So the concept is like a Marine. You're never a former Marine. Yeah, you went to Washington. You're never a former Husky, right?
Right.
That's part of your identity. And the Olympic movement it's a very exclusive club. You have to earn your way into the club. It's not something you can be given because of a legacy. You can't buy your way in. You got to earn your way onto the club, and you can't get kicked out. There is no membership dues. Once an Olympian, always an Olympian. And that's a very special thing for me to remember. And that applies not just to US Olympians, but even more so to European or African or Asian Olympians. That in the Olympic Village, you meet somebody who's an absolute stranger. In case he's got a cauliflower ear, so he must be a wrestler. Or she's 4'11", so she must be a gymnast. And you strike up a conversation and you exchange lapel pins and you build a friendship, even if you don't speak the language. And a relationship is created and that bond continues. And now, 50 years after my Olympics, if I run into somebody and I remember, you were in the Olympics, weren't you? Maybe in my year, maybe 4 years prior, maybe 4 years later, but there's an automatic kinship. If I run into somebody who's looking for a job and he says, I used to be a USC Trojan, I'll try to help him. If he says I competed in the Olympics, aha, this is somebody I want to help. And there is definitely this bond and this I don't know, mutual admiration because we went through a similar struggle together. Right. And that led me when I was president of the alumni, that led me to be a part of the creation of something called the Olympians for Olympians Relief Fund. It was then called the OORF. Now it's the Olympians and Paralympians Relief Fund. And here, let me explain. The U.S. Olympic Committee, now called the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, is focused on the next Olympic team. They're not supposed to worry about the last one. Once you've made the team and now you're off in working in business or the academics or whatever, they let go of that and they're focusing on the next Olympic team. But I find that many Olympians, on occasion, fall on hard times. They need a little bit of help, whether it's an accident, an illness, an injury, or a natural disaster, but sometimes through no fault of their own, they need a little bit of help. And so the Olympic alumni and Paralympic alumni have created a nonprofit where we raise money from within ourselves and we provide grants to Olympians and Paralympians who've had a hard time. They need surgery, they had their car stolen, The computer was soaked in the recent rainstorm, something like that. And we try to help them to the best we can. So that's the Olympians and Paralympians Relief Fund, www.opr.fund. And that's one of the other activities with which I'm involved in. So I'm glad to help former athletes. They're still Olympians, they're still Paralympians, but if they need help, we want to help them.
Right. Talk about one or two Olympic, colleagues from that 76 team, just one or two. And it can be somebody from another country or somebody from the swim squad, the U.S. swim squad. A memory, something about that man or woman's personality, or maybe how it's continued on here 50 years later with somebody. I know Roland was a decades-long friend and your biggest rival in the pool, Roland Mathis, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, John.
Okay. Roland Mathis was the two-time defending champion from East Germany in both backstrokes. In fact, he almost beat Mark Spitz in the butterfly in Munich, but he had a horrible start in the race and he didn't do so. But anyway, nonetheless, his was the face on the poster in my bedroom. And so in the Olympics in Montreal, when I broke his world record in the 100-meter backstroke in the preliminaries, he came swimming up to me, chucked me under the chin and said, "Very fast." And that might have been the highest compliment I've ever received in my sport. Now, the following evening, we raced again in the championship final, and he had not conceded defeat. He gave it his very best. He intentionally false started twice to slow down the race, and I was known for a really good takeoff on the backstroke. And so he held me to the blocks, and he won a bronze medal, but I was able to win gold just ahead of American Peter Rocca for a U.S. gold-silver sweep. But Roland Mathis came to Los Angeles in 2016 on vacation. And he sat in my living room on my couch, and the two of us watched the Olympic backstroke on TV from Rio de Janeiro. That in spite of the political differences, in spite of the language barrier, there's something there that just lasts forever. And I consider him a great role model, a dear friend, and they called him the Rolls Royce of swimming. He was so elegant in the water and out. He's no longer with us. He passed away, but the memories remain. And then the other relationship I have to talk about is my Olympic teammate, Bruce Furness, was a world record holder in the 200 individual medley, an event that had mysteriously been taken off of the Montreal Olympic program. So his best event he could not do, but he also swam a pretty good 200 freestyle. And so he and I raced against each other in the Montreal Olympic pool in the 200 freestyle. He got the gold, I got the silver. Both of us broke the prior world record, but he was a little bit faster. And so it was a great race. And it occurred about 45 minutes after my 100-meter backstroke race with Roland Mathis. And so it was a wonderful day. I was very happy with a silver medal because I just won a gold. And all Olympic medalists have to go through a mandatory press conference, a mandatory drug test. And by then, the facility, the venue was pretty much emptied out. People had left. And the two of us are walking from the medical tent out to meet our parents, each of whom want to take us out to dinner. And Bruce reminded me that no longer are we competitors because in a couple of days we'll be teammates on the 4x200 freestyle relay. And then he said, "Did you get to swim down your race?" And I said, "I didn't really." He says, "I think we better." So walking by the warm down pool, which is underneath the bleachers, 50 meters long, but only 4 lanes wide, the water at this hour, smooth as glass, nobody around, just a couple of fluorescent lights hanging over the ceiling. We disrobe, we still have our swimsuits on, we jump in the water, and we start to swim and loosen down. This is where you lower your pulse rate, you get your oxygen level back in the body, and like synchronized swimmers, we're breathing towards each other on each stroke. And the Olympic 200-meter freestyle is 4 lengths in the pool. We swim 3 legs nice and slow. Halfway back, we stop, and we drape our arms over the water and look at each other in such a, I don't know, it's an affectionate moment. Like, look what we've been through. Look where we are. And then Bruce looks at the remaining 25 yards of the pool and says, "You want to race?" Now, we just raced in front of the eyes of the world, for world record. And I said, "Oh, come on, Bruce." And I took off. And I swam as fast as I could, trying to reach the wall. He grabs my suit. He pulls me back. We wrestle in the water. And we come meet our parents with arms around each other's shoulders, laughing and smiling. We had had such a good time. The battle we went through was to determine the winner. It wasn't to determine who's a nice guy or a bad guy. And so we could enjoy each other's company even to this day. So that's one of the measurable stories that I use to remind myself that you don't have to hate your opponent. You have to focus on the job, and whoever swims best, he gets the medal. That's all there is to it.
On talking about, competing and being the best at that point in time, 1976, against people like Bruce or Roland, really quickly, for people that are younger, especially technology. So technology in swimming, anything different with swimsuits, goggles, anything that was happening then, obviously a lot's changed since then, but for you, can you remember one or two things about equipment?
The first time I wore swimming goggles was at the Olympic trials in Chicago in 1972. Prior to that, swimmers had their eyes open in the water. The chlorine was difficult. Our eyes were scratchy. I had a hard time reading my high school junior year thesis in front of the class because I couldn't see it because of the chlorine that had been in my eyes. Since then, the goggles have improved. People were wearing them all the time. I chose not to wear them in the Olympics because there's always the chance that something might slip. But nonetheless, that's a technological improvement, along with the new swimsuits. I swam in a nylon suit. Buster Crabbe swam in a cotton suit in the 1930s. Then they moved to nylon and then lycra. And then you had that shark skin suit that covered the entire body that's now been made illegal. Those rules were changed. The backstrokers had to touch the wall with their hand before they could do a turn in Montreal. That rule was changed shortly after 1984. So now they can do a freestyle flip turn and then they come off the wall. They don't even have to touch the wall with their hands. So the race is significantly shorter. Now backstrokers have little starting wedges that put in the water so that their feet don't slip on the wall on the backstroke start. That's something that didn't exist. The underwater dolphin kick, which was made famous by David Burkhoff in 1988, that is now an integral part of a race. If you don't have a good underwater, you're probably not going to win because it's worth at least a body length per turn. And we didn't used to do that. Swimmers didn't think that was necessary. Now, there's a lot of weight training that is necessary. There's a lot of dry land that is necessary. And that's just some of the things that have changed in swimming. But the biggest thing that has changed in the Olympics is the removal of the word amateur from the Olympic Charter.
Right.
International Olympic Committee required athletes not to be paid to be athletes. They wanted them to be there for the love of sport. In fact, that's where the word amateur comes from. The Latin, amo, amas, amat, I love, you love, we love. An amateur loves what they're doing. An amateur coin collector loves coins. An amateur stamp collector loves stamps. In America, the word seems to sound or seems to imply something less than really good. Would you go to an amateur dentist? Right? It's not the same. But in reality, the amateur athlete has to love the sport. When in 1991 or 2, they removed that word, this allowed athletes to make money above the table, sponsorships, prize money, endorsements, appearance fees. And all of a sudden, it became very lucrative to be a good Olympic athlete. And you could make a significant amount of money by being good at your sport. So now the athletes in college are facing a different question. I can stay in school and finish my eligibility and scholarship and then get a real job, or I can focus and put all my eggs into the Olympic basket and I might win a bunch of prize money. And that would more than compensate me for the lost scholarship. That's what they're having, those are the decisions they're having to make. Recently, the addition of NIL, the name, image, and likeness rules, now allow athletes to remain in college, still make a lot of money, but now finish their degree. So that's probably the best of both worlds, and I hope it works out. But when you make the value of athletic performance increase at the expense of education, the perceived value of education will decrease. And to me, that's a real concern. I think as parents, you get your kids involved in Little League and youth sports, not because you expect them to go to the Olympics, but because you know that participating in athletic competitions and training builds a better adult. You know, a sport is supposed to prepare athletes for life after sport. And the moment you decide sport is in and of itself all I need to worry about, then you stop worrying about life after sport, and that could be dangerous.
Yes, and we could go off on that fork some more and keep talking about that and that issue that you raised in our last discussion about separation from the college experience because of inducements, because of things like more money on the table. Maybe that's why a higher number of swimmers are dropping out of their university to train someplace else, because it has to do with where they think their earning potential might be maximized. And we're not begrudging anybody making as much as they can. It's at what expense really is the issue. And is it worth it looking back 5-10 years later if you drop out of USC or Stanford or wherever to go train for a couple of years? Maybe it doesn't work out at the Olympics. Maybe you're training to be a pro on the pro circuit. But having regret, because once you make that move as a young person, you might have a different perspective at 30, 40. That's, I think, part of what you're talking about. I think,
let me share a different perspective for you. I, for 15 years, was a good friend of Louis Zamperini. He was a 1936 Olympian in Berlin. And he said when he came back to the States, people would ask him, "You're an Olympian, what place did you win?" And he said, "I won 8th place." And he was proud that he won 8th place, and they were proud for him. But I would say today, people say, "Did you win? Oh, only a silver medal? Oh, that's too bad."
yeah,
And this puts a lot of pressure on our athletes that they can't settle for a silver. They have to have a gold. So they keep coming back until they win their gold, or they put all their eggs in a gold medal basket. And frankly, most of the viewers of this program will have a hard time naming any athlete, any American Olympian, whose best result was but a silver medal. In America, we're all about winning. In Europe, if you win a medal of any color, you're a hero. But over here, it's different. We're all about the gold.
and on that note, I was going to ask you a moment ago. I want to circle back to the question that I had, which was talk about one or two of the toughest moments in your training journey. We talked about technology and equipment. There's nutrition. I used to joke when we did 2-a-day workouts for swimming. If you wanted to be good, you were in the pool twice a day, and that's still pretty much the case. And on the weekends, but nutrition back then was getting out of the pool and getting a maple bar. We weren't thinking about food. Were you thinking about food and what you were putting in your body?
I believe Michael Phelps is quoted as saying he burns 12,000 calories a day. And if you think about it, just to chew and swallow 12,000 calories is another 4 hours out of his day. In my era, I figured it out to be about 8,000 calories. I didn't do weight training. I didn't work quite as hard as Michael, maybe. 8,000 calories is still a lot to eat, since the normal diet's about 2,000 calories. So when I was eating, I wasn't concerned about the quality of the food. I was concerned about the quantity of the calories. And I poured honey over scrambled eggs. I would eat canned peaches and then drink the juice. I would eat an entire box of Frosted Flakes. I'd sit down with a bowl, a box, and a carton of milk, and I'd just keep eating until they were all gone. To me, the goal was to have enough fuel in the body to burn through 2 hours of training. And many days I would run out of fuel before the end of workout. And you can really feel when you're tapped out. It's just, you can give no more. So diet wasn't a real big consideration for me, but was a consideration is, can I push myself? How hard can I swim? Peter Dalen, the head swim coach at USC, would often say, the secret to swimming fast is not how far you swim, and it's not how hard you swim. The secret to swimming fast is how far are you willing to swim hard. The combination of quality and quantity, you got to do both. And to do both, you're going to burn a lot of fuel.
Yeah. I'm so glad I asked you the diet question. An entire box of Frosted Flakes. I'm laughing with you. I remember that, just craving fuel, just being so zonked from 4 or 5 hours in the pool every day. So I want to transition. I could ask you more specific questions about training. I do want you to talk about your one tough memory, a tough workout. Speaking of, I think that's so good, following on the heels of what Peter said to you about training hard and sustaining it for a long time. Can you think of one or two moments where you finished a workout and it was 10,000, it was, 12,000 yards, whatever, a couple of hours of really hard training and being fast enough to get those kinds of yards packed into a 2.5 hour. Can you share one memory from training where you really had a gut check?
I have a couple of annual things to tell you about. In high school, George French, the coach of Ladera Oaks Aquatics Club, told everybody well in advance our Christmas Eve workout will always include a 1650-yard butterfly. And that was the workout that had the highest attendance every year because nobody wanted to wimp out on that workout. And we'd go down lane 1 and back lane 2. We would circle swim butterfly, swinging our arms around, and it was tough. But when you finished it, you looked at yourself differently. Like, I did it. I accomplished something. And now all of a sudden, 3 800s on the 9 minutes doesn't seem quite so scary. And then at USC, Peter Dalen didn't want to do that workout. So I said, Coach, I would like to, on my own, every Christmas workout, do a 10,000-yard backstroke nonstop.
Wow.
And at the time, we had 2 hours to get it, and I was swimming the distance in 1 hour and 48 minutes. 1 hour and 46. That's like 11 minutes per 1,000, which is pretty darn good for nonstop. The first time I did it, I did not wear paddles, and my fingers were rubbed raw by all the flip turns. But my second year, I wore paddles, and it didn't hurt so much on the hand, and it became sort of a moment of pride for me. And I'm happy to say every year, the 10,000 meter got a little bit faster. I said 10,000 meter, 10,000 yards got a little bit faster. I swam short course in college.
That's a great story, John. Short course, 25-yard pool. So that's a lot of flip turns over 10,000 yards.
Yeah.
I want to pull back the lens and just talk about sort of the Olympics big picture, maybe, Montreal, but then jumping on to the Olympics fast forward 80, 84. Is there one memory from 76 beyond swimming, that sticks with you? And then let's just talk about the Olympics, the way you've seen them progress, 2, 3, 4 things over the last 50 years that you think are significant, good or bad. The games have evolved for better, for worse.
In addition to being a broadcaster, I made my living as a motivational speaker, teaching corporate America how to think and act like an Olympian. And one of the comments I begin my remarks by saying is that Olympic champions are not extraordinary people. We are ordinary people who found a way to accomplish extraordinary results in the area that matters most to us. Because I'm a good swimmer doesn't mean I do my taxes correctly. It doesn't mean I'm a good father. It doesn't mean I'm a good employee, but I'm a good swimmer. I was able to do that. And I tell the story about in the Olympic Village in Montreal, there's athletes from all sorts of countries and all sorts of sports. And you don't know if they speak English or not. And I sat down at the table and I watched an athlete from what I presume to be an underdeveloped country sit down at the table. He had a ceramic coffee mug and a saucer underneath it and a tea bag on the edge of the saucer, which he picked up. He smelled the tea bag and then he tore it open and poured the loose tea leaves into the water. He'd never seen a flow through tea bag. And so I felt the bond. We're both Olympians. So I take my cup and my tea bag, I point at the bag and I say, paper, okay. Paper, okay. And I dip the bag in, dip it a couple of times, drape the string over the edge. I slide the cup across the table and he looks at me and then he looks in the cup and I could see the awareness sweep across his face. He smiles. He goes, pepper, okay. I felt I'd done it. I'd struck a blow for international harmony. I'd reached across the language barrier. I felt really good about myself. And I watch as he reaches over and he picks up an envelope of sugar and drops it in the cup. Paper, okay. It was a silly mistake, I grant, but the very next day, the same guy comes walking into the village with a bronze medal around his neck. He's one of the top 3 in the world at his chosen field, but capable of ordinary mistakes. And so the logical conclusion is that you don't have to be a superhuman to win a medal at the Olympics. You just got to do the things that they do and do them correctly. So that was my take-home moment in Montreal. I made many friends there. Ann Myers Drysdale was the captain of the women's basketball team that won a silver in Montreal. She's a big UCLA booster. I'm a big USC booster, a lot of rivalry. We call each other our crosstown siblings. She's my sister, and I'm her brother from a different school. Bruce Jenner, I knew we attended a lot of fundraisers in the year following the Olympics, and I've seen Caitlin on occasion since. I've got a picture of Sugar Ray Leonard punching me in the chin, you know, and Nadia Comaneci and her husband Bart Connor, dear friends. When I went on to become a play-by-play announcer for Wide World of Sports, we covered gymnastics, and Bart and Nadia were in the seats next to me doing the color commentary. So, you know, there's a lot of relationships that go on. In fact, many of them led to chapters in the book, Awaken the Olympian Within, because the whole purpose of sport is to prepare us for life after sport. So I asked 28 Olympians, what did sport teach you that helps you in your life after sport? And so Nadia talks about the pursuit of perfection. Dick Fosbury talks about innovation and the new Fosbury flop. Dan Jansen talks about, you know, what do you do after you fall down? You know, Rowdy Gaines talks about attention to detail. All of these Olympians have little anecdotes like the one with the tea bag that helps us move on to greater success later in life.
Yeah, there's a Stoic saying, this is going back 2,000 years, right? The Greek Stoics, ancient Stoic quote, "The obstacle is the way." There's a book now with that title, but you talked about Nancy Hogshead's quote to you. The obstacle really is the way. There's not anybody that's made it to the Olympics or made it onto the podium that didn't have an obstacle in the way prior that ended up being the fuel to help get them there. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Larson Jensen, an American medal winner at the Olympics, told me that his coach told him, you have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
That's for sure.
Being uncomfortable. You know, don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Understand. Here's the physiological reality. I can lift a barbell 10 times, but not 11. What happened between number 10 and number 11? Why can I not lift it when a moment ago I could? Well, the act of lifting it 10 times actually tears down your muscle fibers. But overnight, they grow back stronger than they were. Therefore, if you don't take 2 steps backward, you cannot take 3 steps forward. If I just sit on the couch, my muscles will atrophy. They will decrease. So you need pain, you need challenge, you need struggle to build the endurance necessary to succeed. And when you understand that, then you go into a sales career and somebody says, no, I don't want your product. It makes you tougher. That's when you begin the hard work, right? And so these are the life lessons that sport can teach us if we embrace the suck. Isn't that a phrase? Embrace the suck. You don't have to enjoy it, but you got to embrace it. You can't push it away.
Especially sports like swimming or rowing or sports where there's a lot of guts required if you just want to be on the team, just suiting up and showing up every day. And that's a life lesson, isn't it?
Oh yeah, but I don't want to make it sound like swimming was brutal and painful the entire time. There is a price to be paid, but it was also a delight. I found my social life in the pool. I mean, I wanted to go to the prom with some other swimmer. The first time I saw women's shoulder blades, they were in the pool next to me. You know, these are the kinds of things that help an athlete mature into an adult. So I don't want to harp on the fact that swimming is hard. Yes, it is. But the hard is what makes it great. That's what Tom Hanks said in the movie A League of Their Own. You know, there's no crying in baseball. The hard is what makes it great. And so embrace it.
So fast forward, let's talk about the Olympics here, the last, pre-COVID, it's the last 10 years. What do you think has changed with the Olympics besides, things like high def TV and drones and equipment's always evolving? You said something interesting to me about governments investing in military and sport because of motivation, things like nationalism and projecting power. Countries are still doing that. We talked about Norway winning the most Winter Olympic medals. That's not just because of genetics or DNA. Their country invests a lot of money in winter sports for 5.5 million people, in total. But can you comment on some things you've noticed the last decade or so with the Olympics?
I cannot I think that what you're talking about, this nationalism, existed long before the last 10 years.
Right.
The Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China are definitely using sport to promote the ideals of communism over capitalism. East Germany did it as a government. And these governments now have demonstrated their willingness to cheat in order to win more medals. The Russians had a window where they would pass their urine tests through and get clean urine so that they wouldn't get caught for drug abuse. The Chinese falsified passports to allow athletes who were underage to compete where they should not have done so. I mean, these are horrible stories, but it demonstrates how important it is to their government. The United States does not take money from the US government to field our team. There are some expenses they do pay for, like our USADA, the US Anti-Drug Testing Organization, Safe Sport. But generally speaking, it's the American individuals and companies who fund the US team at the Olympic Games. And that to me is appropriate, because if the government gets their fingers in the pot, they're going to want to have one Olympian from every voting district, and they're going to make all sorts of rules that don't make sense. So I like the fact that we're separate 501c3. But it is important, if you're going to be a nonprofit organization, you have to demonstrate the common good, the value to society at large. And why is it helpful to Americans who don't swim to have Michael Phelps win gold medals? Well, the only reason it benefits them is if the sporting arena prepares better citizens to join the real world, or the stories that come out of sport provide real inspiration and applause character and sportsmanship and those good things, so that we become a better nation as a whole. So these are things that I think are very important moving forward. The big changes in the last 10, 15 years has been the use of the digital platform to show the Olympics. When we were competing, or when I was competing, we always had to watch the television screen. There were 3 channels to choose from, and the one that had the Olympics on it was where you went. Now there's hundreds of channels, and you don't even have to wait until nighttime to watch it. You can watch it live streaming online. And so it's a lot more difficult, or rather it's a little bit more challenging, to justify the sponsorship agreements with NBC, with Coca-Cola, with Delta Airlines, those kinds of things. That becomes a bit more challenging. And that's one of the things we're finding now. And then I should also note that the cost of hosting an Olympics continues to escalate way ahead of inflation. And this is making it a lot more difficult for other countries to host an Olympics. And the Olympic movement is a global movement. We should move it around. We should let people all over the world experience a live Olympic Games. And the more expensive they become, the more difficult it is for smaller countries to do this. And then you have to rely on communist governments or very creative democracies who know how to raise funds from the private community. So it is a challenge. I've also noticed the inclusion of some brand new sports, breakdancing, rock climbing, skateboarding. These sports did not exist in the Olympics when I was competing, but they've been added because the International Olympic Committee wants to make the games relevant to every new generation. And the new generations are doing those sports. So those have been additions. And if you add more sports, you're eventually going to have to drop some sports. And of course, the athletes who've trained all their life to do something, and now it's not in the Olympics, their hearts are broken as well. So these are real challenges that have to be balanced against the common good.
Yeah, and on that note, of course, the boycotts you touched on in 80 and 84, there were athletes that missed those games, that had trained, that were dedicated for years before the 80 games. If you were an American, I have a friend that was on the women's crew team, out of luck. And then in 84 for Soviet athletes. And that's the intersection of politics and sports, where the Olympics become part of a bigger agenda. And it's unfortunate that there are victims in that process, but we're not going to be able to separate politics and sport and the Olympics, or gender in the Olympics, or race in the Olympics, et cetera, nationalism, et cetera. They're part and parcel. So we're trying to manage it. What's one sport that's been dropped from the Olympics that you can think of that was there for several Olympics but is no longer?
Oh, baseball and softball were dropped, and they're going to come back again. So they did not appear in the last couple of Olympics. Modern pentathlon was on the bubble. This is a sport that Baron Coubertin invented because in the 1920s, so many governments had sports programs in the military, but not in the schools. So we decided, let's add a sport that involves shooting and fencing and horseback riding and running and swimming. And all of those militaries had those skills. So they were able to generate an Olympic sport with athletes from a lot of different countries. So now we have almost 200 countries competing in the Olympic movement, and the more the merrier. And that's one of the factors determining an eligibility of a sport. How many countries do it? How many continents do it? How many athletes are involved? And so these younger sports are the ones that are being considered for addition.
Yeah, for the same reasons. Well, I want to thank you very much for a wonderful interview, as good or better than I could have hoped for interview number one. And I'm hoping, John, now you'll tell me ahead of time that you'll do one brief follow-up interview sometime in 24 after Paris, so we can just get a couple of reflections from you while everything's fresh. But I'm just so grateful. I want to thank you for being a role model for me for 50 years now, way beyond the pool. And I just thank you, appreciate what you stand for, and I wish you the very best. We will have links on this interview on YouTube, again, to John's webpage, and maybe one or two other things that he would direct you to that he's involved with today that are part of his passion projects. And thank you again, John Naber.
Thank you, Tim. I had a good time.